Okay, so before starting, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, as well as the evaluation committee for the selection of my paper. So my talk is about the third movement of Beethoven's Piano Sonata Opus 106, the famous Hammerklavier Sonata. It is a way to pay tribute to the composer on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of his birth this year. But this piece also constitutes an excellent case for the study of theory and analysis of timbre based on auditory scene analysis principles. This research is part of the field of music theory and analysis, which deals with the consideration of structural and functional aspects of music. This area has been traditionally and primarily focused on pitch organization systems, in particular through the development of tonal and post-tonal theories. It also considers duration aspects of music, as is the case in the theories of musical forms. The consideration of the timbral dimension of music from an analytical and theoretical perspective is much more recent, going back to the end of the 1970s. Several reference work by Erickson, Kogan, or Gig, in particular, pay attention to sound aspects of music, even with a not really standardized terminology. New analytical methods are also developed, including in particular new approaches to musical scores, as well as the use of visual representations in the form of graphs or spectrograms. Timbre is thus not considered as a secondary parameter anymore. One main issue in music analysis and theory is precisely the parametric quality of timbre and its relation to other musical dimensions, pitch and duration. Timbre is a multi-parametric dimension characterized by its multidimensionality and complexity. It is not a mere color of sound, but a meta-parameter that can integrate all musical parameters. Timbre is therefore strongly related to musical notation, the choice of doublings, the spacing between the notes, etc., and not exclusively dependent from musical performance, even if it needs, of course, a sound realization of music to be materialized. Timbre can neither be reduced to a mere instrument recognition or timbre identity, and it includes aspects of qualitative timbre, as attested by the overall timbres produced by a group of instruments, as well as the multiple timbres that can be produced by one same instrument. About auditory scene analysis, which you certainly all know, I would like to point out that this theory developed by Bregman is based on the idea of auditory grouping principles and may apply to every type of auditory scene, not necessarily musical situations. In particular, Bregman suggested the possibility of developing a scientific theory of orchestration on the basis of a theory. Its application to music analysis and theory needs some adaptations, but is particularly crucial in the area of timbre analysis and theory. Indeed, timbre and orchestration are related in the process of auditory scene analysis in the sense that overall timbre qualities emerge from sound groups that are perceived as having important relations with one another, in particular those integrated into one stream. The field of music analysis and theory is not so familiar with perceptual aspects as understood by psychology. Only recently has some research attempted to draw concrete propositions for the integration of psychological models such as auditory scene analysis in the field of music theory and analysis, considering in particular orchestral repertoire. About the choice of the Adagio of Opus 106 as a case study, I would like to mention that this movement, organized as a wide sonata form in F-sharp minor, is part of the last Beethoven style, known for its new conception of musical forms, as well as its structural use of musical timbre. Some timbre-oriented analysis underlined the difficulty to use the model of the sonata form in order to account for the sonic aspects of the adagio, as well as the idea of autonomy of timbre and its dialectical articulation with other musical dimensions. I also showed that this movement is characterized by a formal use of the una corda tre corde sonority, resulting in an overall A-B-A-B-A multi-parted timbre structure, a model derived from sonata form, but in divergence here with the tonal thematic organization. So this movement was therefore a good candidate for a timbre analysis based on auditory scene analysis. In relation to music theory and analysis, the research presented here has a twofold objective. On the one hand, building an auditory scene analysis to gain insight into the structural organization of timbre, in particular in the case of piano music. And on the other, going further into the musical comprehension of the Beethoven adagio and its particularities from a timbre perspective. The analytical method used here is based on the taxonomy of orchestral grouping effects developed by Stephen McAdams and his team in the context of the actor partnership, represented here by the figure on the left. In order for these categories derived from auditory scene analysis to be operational for the analysis of orchestral music, the three main types of auditory groupings, concurrent, sequential, and segmental, were interpreted in terms of resulting perceptual qualities and orchestral effects, as you can see on the figure on the right. I go a little fast on this taxonomy because it has already been commented and you can easily find publications on it. So what is important to have in mind is that the system of different levels of categories and subcategories is used for the annotation of musical scores with colored boxes. And the systematic character of the procedure allows an implementation in the form of a software named OrgView, currently under development, and some models of analysis from the orchestral repertoire are also available in an online database named Orchard. So in the case of my analysis, I proceeded as follows. I annotated the piano score using the same taxonomy and the same color code as in the OrgView software. I annotated when possible with colored frames, otherwise with other annotation marks, shaded boxes or bicolor frames, lines, textual annotation, etc., due to some difficulties related to the piano notation on two staves. I proceeded to a linear annotation of the whole movement before any overall consideration. My annotations are based on intense and detailed listening phases on the basis of an audio recording of the piece by pianist Alfred Brendel, including play and replay of different passages. And in addition, I used my personal piano playing for a better understanding of the possibilities to structure a passage into a coherent auditory and musical image in a concrete environment. This was very useful, but in any case, the Brendel recording remained as the reference point. So my analysis takes the form of an annotated version of the 12 pages of the score. This first shows the possibility to describe the whole movement in a systematic manner with analytical categories pertaining to auditory grouping principles. Even if these categories were originally designed for the analysis of orchestral music, their level of generality allowed applying as well to other musical repertoires. The taxonomy used was relevant, accounting for the diversity of timbre and orchestration situations that can be encountered in this movement. The categories pertaining to sequential grouping related to the opposition integration segregation have been the most useful. On the opposite, the timbre heterogeneity category was not so relevant in this analysis, maybe, I guess, because it was not part of a binary opposition, which revealed here very efficient. The timbre and orchestration effects were sometimes strongly interlocked, as is the case with the category integration stream, closely related with the blend sustained categories. We find examples in measure 1 and 25, provided with multiple octave doublings, 3 to 4 simultaneous octaves in measure 25, for example, giving rise here to a timbral emergence and integrated into one single auditory stream. So I present here a sound example of measure 1, the beginning of the first theme of the movement. Another case can be found at the end of the movement, measure 184 to 87, where the integration stream effect results from strong harmonicity relations related to the choice of registers, the spacing between simultaneous sounding parts, and the use of the sustaining pedal throughout this passage. The annotation here is necessarily approximative and does not exempt from a more detailed analysis. You have here a sound example.
Nathalie, before you play your example, could you turn up the volume on your computer?
Sorry?
Can you turn up your volume? I think we're not getting your sound example, or maybe just getting it from the microphone.
I'm not sure to have shared my sound, but I don't see what it is.
Maybe take a look at the share screen menu to see if you can share the computer sound. We might just be hearing the sound from your own microphone there. This will be in Zoom.
I don't find. I can try again.
So to interfere, you have to have clicked the stereo system sound, and it's in the advanced options at the top middle when you say your screen. So you should click advanced and then, have you done that?
No.
So when you say the screen, you go in the advanced option, advanced in the middle, and then bottom left should be a tick box. You click and say stereo system sound.
You see my screen here? Or?
Yeah.
We see your PowerPoint screen, but this will be under the Zoom menu. I believe at the very top you have a share screen menu that you can select this in.
No, I do not have that.
Well, yesterday I didn't have it either, so
Okay.
sometimes it's weird. Well, I had it in the past, so I don't know.
I don't know if anyone has specific advice. If not, perhaps we could continue, and perhaps if you turn up your local sound, we'll at least be able to hear that better through the microphone connection. It's not perfect, but that might be our best bet.
Yeah. If you want, I don't find the way to share the sound.
I think you have to unshare and reshare.
Yeah, I already. So I unshare, I reshare. So here I share.
It's at the bottom.
Perhaps I continue without sound, or.
Why don't you try continuing and turning up the sound on your local computer? We might be able to hear it through your microphone.
Yes. Okay. Here is, you see, a microphone is on the maximum, so I try. Okay, next example. So some effects can also occur simultaneously, giving rise to superimposed or overlapped annotations on the score, accounting for different layers of effects. For example, in measure 45 to 52, the timbre echo effect simultaneously acts at the foreground of a stratification into 3 strata. Here is the example of the beginning of the second theme. Okay, some passages are also provided with auditory ambiguity. For example, at measures 10 to 13, where the introduction of a few notes breaking the rhythmic synchronicity of the lines sometimes give the impression of having multiple layers, but the effect disappears quite immediately. So after this first descriptive phase, it was possible to shed light on some aspect of the formal organization of the movement. The table here represents the evolutions of the tonal thematic dimension, sonata form, and of the timbral dimension, here as a result of orchestral grouping effects giving rise to dominant timbre effects. Indeed, when considering the orchestral effects from the perspective of a higher structural level, some of them have a greater weight in given sections of the musical form and can thus be qualified as dominant timbre effects, the other secondary effects having much more an ornamental function. This is particularly obvious in the case of the first thematic group in F sharp minor, which is characterized by a surface texture dominant effect that is an integration grouping effect that emphasizes a perception of sonic fusion. As we can see in the annotated score of this part, the texture effect here in yellow occupies 62% of the total space and is even reinforced by a stream effect at the beginning and at the end of the passage, the single boxes in light green. Texture effects are submitted to periodic returns and behave thus like a sort of timbral center. Timbral modulations to segregation type effects are never longer than 3 consecutive measures and can thus be considered as secondary or even neighboring effects. In all this section, there is a very subtle usage of doublings, especially octaves and thirds doublings, and the una corda pedal is maintained throughout, which tends to favor the fusion effects, maybe, I guess, for reasons of brightness. So the same kind of analysis can be applied to the other sections of the sonata form, which gives rise to this overall table where the boxes in orange represent integration type passages, which emphasize perceptual fusion, and the boxes in green, segregation type passages, which emphasize separation into several streams or layers, and thus a sensation of a multiplicity of virtual sources. We can see that the timbre dimension is not systematically correlated to the tonal thematic one and seems relatively autonomous. The timbre articulations do not always match with the main articulations of the sonata form, as we can see with the second thematic group and in the coda. Furthermore, some thematic materials reappear with other timbral attributes, in particular the theme 1 in the recapitulation. This segregation version of theme 1 is quite remarkable here because on the one hand, it favors a sensation of release, characteristic of sonata recapitulations between the first and the second groups, which are here stated with the same timbre effect. But on the other hand, the effect used should have been the opposite one. That is the second group with the timbre of the first, like in the tonal dimension, which is here not the case. If we follow, so I commented on this on these aspects. If we follow a little more in details the evolution of theme 1 throughout the movement, we notice that some formal ambiguities are introduced. Around the beginning of the development, here, there is a mismatch between the thematic and timbral dimensions with the timbre of theme 1, surface texture, stated in convergence with the conclusion theme of the exposition, and theme 1 is itself beginning the development in a segregation type timbre, which is not perceptually very salient here. The perception of the recapitulation is also deeply affected by the presence of theme 1 stated with contrasting timbre attributes. Stratification into 2 layers, the foreground itself segregated into 2 streams, and stream 1 is the pitch material of theme 1. So here's the sound example of the recapitulation of theme 1, but in another timbre. finally, the real recapitulation of theme 1 with its original timbre only occurs in the coda, measure 162, and with it, the complete release of all the musical dimensions of the movement here. It's a sort of recapitulation of timbre 1 with theme 1. Let us also notice the 3 consecutive timbral progressions towards more and more fused timbre, which is characteristic of the conclusive effect of the coda from a timbral perspective, a sort of movement from tension to release. So the analysis as a whole finally shows a formal structure of the movement organized as a sort of formal polyphony or formal counterpoint. The binary oppositions characteristic of the sonata form seem to reflect in the timbre dimension, but not with a strict correlation. The timbre dimension does not clarify the sonata structure, but introduces a complexity, which is musically speaking very interesting and quite new in this music repertoire. So 2 general sets of remarks to conclude. First, this research shows the formal role of timbre in the Beethoven adagio and its possibilities of convergence or divergence with the tonal thematic dimension. Timbre is here part of a strategy to renew classical forms, such as the sonata form, from the inside. Further analysis of similar pieces could make possible a generalization of these results. Second, this research brings to light concrete tools for the analysis of timbre in piano music based on auditory scene analysis. The general idea of timbral effects considered on different hierarchical structural levels, as well as the notion of binary oppositions, such as segregation integration, closely related to tension release processes, which emerge from this analysis, seem particularly promising from a theoretical perspective and should be further developed in accordance to other music theoretical research on these topics. Thank you. Some references here.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. We're a little bit behind because of our technical interruption there. I think we can take one question and then we'll move on to our second presenter, Matt Zeller. If you have a question, can you please just raise your hand or put something in the chat? Okay, if there are no questions, perhaps, Nathalie, I can ask how you see this developing over the course of the 19th century. You mentioned choosing Beethoven because of the anniversary this year, but I'm curious how you see that work relating to later 19th century pianists, for example.
Yes, I have some ideas because I studied several works, 19th century piano pieces from Schumann, Liszt, and so on, but not especially with this method. I developed some remarks on auditory scene analysis in a previous publication, but here is a systematic manner to develop that. So I have so pieces in mind which are also good candidates for this. For example, Schumann pieces. Carnaval is very interesting from timbre point of view. The last pieces of Franz Liszt, or also Chopin pieces, but I do not have time to try analysis on all these pieces, but it's my future project to do that, yes.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We'll move on to our second speaker, Matt Zeller. Matt